Hey, everybody.
Hey,
Welcome to Bingefest.
yeah, so today we're talking about okay. So just to give you a little behind the scenes magic here, we sat on these episodes for months, maybe even like close to a year.
Yeah,
And
10 months.
as I was finally editing them to say, all right, we got to get these out the door, I noticed that in like 3, 4 episodes, we said the next episode was going to be Scott Pilgrim takes off, and we never did it. So this is finally us sitting down a year later because Scott
Ta-da!
Pilgrim Takes Off came out in November 2023. I watched it the night it came out. I think I watched it
Wow.
again the next day, and this is now August of 2024. So I did do some boning up this morning. I rewatched the first episode and the last episode, um, and kind of refreshed my memory on what was going on in between. But yeah, it's been a minute.
It's been a minute. I think I watched it at your insistence
Yeah.
December of 2023.
Now, before we say insistence, I
Mm,
mean, there are some things like I tried to get Kate to watch Chucky, and she got like 5, 10 minutes into the first episode and
10
stopped, which
minutes.
is such a shame because that is
I
an
couldn't do it.
amazing show for those first 2 years, we'll say. I wasn't as impressed with
Mm,
season three. But
yeah.
Scott Pilgrim ought to have been something you would have watched anyway. Like, we're talking about the sequel to an Edgar Wright movie. Edgar Wright was involved in the show. I don't know to what extent, to be honest. He's listed as an
I don't
executive
either.
producer.
But
But
I
just
love
by
him.
virtue of the fact that it was animation, he wouldn't really have been director. Yeah.
No.
So
But
this should have been the
Edgar
kind of thing you would have watched anyway.
Yeah, so okay, so to be fair, I don't know how it escaped me, but the original Scott Pilgrim movie was so
Right.
much fun. It was
Yeah.
so much fun, and the cast is freaking amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know how Scott Pilgrim Takes Off kind of went over my head. I just didn't notice that it had been released at all. Hadn't heard anything about it. And then you told me about it, and you were like, and guess what? They got the whole cast back. And
Yeah.
I was for an animated show, like I could not believe it.
And I mean, when you talk about that cast, I think at the time that they made Scott Pilgrim versus the World, most of that cast, I don't want to call them unknowns, but I want to say they were up and comers. Like, you
Yes.
had a lot of people like Aubrey Plaza hadn't broken out yet. Anna Kendrick had been in Twilight but hadn't really broken out on her own yet. Brandon Routh was kind of big at the time with Superman Returns, but maybe his star like faded more than the rest. But like Michael Cera, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Mae Whitman, like there was just so many people on that cast that were
Yeah.
like today, Chris Evans, like you just couldn't make that movie for less than like $600 million or something,
Right.
you know.
Right. Mary Elizabeth is the one that I'm really impressed with because she um was one of my favorite characters of all time in the Fargo series. She was
Yeah,
amazing in that. And she just starred again with Ewan McGregor. Is that his last name? Ewan
yeah.
McGregor? Yeah, in A
That's her
Gentleman in
real life
Moscow.
husband, by the way.
That's her real life husband. Yeah, I think they
Yeah.
met on the set of Fargo.
Mm,
They just were both in this beautiful show called A Gentleman in Moscow, which was based on one of my all-time favorite books. Killed it, just absolutely nailed it. Like, this is a woman who can do anything, and she's
yeah.
got a face that can make her be anyone. She was actually in a really underrated movie called Kate, I think. With she was a spy and her handler betrayed her, and it was freaking amazing. Like, this someone who can do anything, but she's so underrated, you would never know it. And here she is in this cartoon.
Yeah,
Like,
and she was just in
unbelievable.
Ahsoka, like, so she's got
Yes.
that indie cred. She's also got that like big budget action cred. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I love her. And I could not believe that she was the voice of Ramona Flowers, the character that she
Yeah.
portrayed in real life on the big screen. That was
So
unbelievable.
so here is the legend behind that. And I mean, I'm sure it's true. They've all said it. I don't know if it was that it led to this or what, but basically, when they made Scott Pilgrim versus the World, the whole cast was on an email chain, and they would all talk and share jokes and memes and all that. And like anything, I mean, I think that was 2010. Something like that peters out, just like eventually maybe anyway, but also just because like we don't really use email to talk to our friends
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe like the last thing that was said in that was like somebody shared a meme. And then 10 years later, out of nowhere, Michael Cera replies all to the email chain with like LOL, from like the last meme or whatever. And Chris Evans is like, "Are you serious right now? You're replying to a 10-year-old meme?" Like, yeah.
It's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, so that kind of got everybody jazzed up to maybe like do something. And I know they did during the COVID-19 lockdown, they did a table read of the script for the movie. Um, with the whole cast. And I think you had like a couple of the people who would be considered like super, super busy even during lockdown who are like, all right, I'm just going to be here for like my part and then I'm out. But otherwise, like everybody was there and they all said like they'd love to get together and do something else. And so I guess that led to the I'm going to call this a sequel. And because I'm going to call this a sequel, I think
Yeah.
now is the best time to say if you haven't watched this, if this is something you're thinking about checking out and you'd be upset if we spoiled it, it is impossible to discuss this without spoiling, at the very minimum, the big twist at the end of the first episode. So here's your warning. Like go off, watch the show, maybe watch the movie if you haven't seen that, come back. Um,
So that
yeah.
being said, can you synopsize the
Sure.
movie and
Yeah,
then yeah, okay, so let's start there. Let's synopsize the movie.
sure. So Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life was a book written by Brian Lee O'Malley. It was a comic book. You would call it very like manga inspired, I guess would be the word. Um, and it was basically it was a coming of age story about a hero who kind of sucks. Like Scott Pilgrim is sort of a shitty character. He's very self-absorbed. He mooches off of everybody. He's 23 dating a girl in high school. Like he's awful.
It's
He's
not
done
great.
bad things to his friends. He's cheating on one girl and hanging out with the other. I don't know. So the book, which went over 6 volumes, was all about Scott eventually needing to kind of own up to his mistakes, um, and kind of atone for, like the harm that he's done to his friends, but also like gain his own self-respect so that he could fall in love with this girl and the two of them could live happily ever after. That was Ramona Flowers. Um, they described it as kind of like it was a love story that was in the formatted style of a musical, but in a musical where emotions get really big, they sing, and in Scott Pilgrim, when emotions get really big, they fight. So it's structured like a video game where there are levels and boss fights at the end of every level, and he must defeat Ramona's 7 evil exes in order to be with her. And they have a lot of fun with that concept. But yeah, that was 10 years ago, directed by Edgar Wright, starring a gigantic who's who of who would become big stars later. And then what is it? It's 13 years later, after everything I just said there, they made a Netflix show. I want to say it was 5 to 8 episodes. 8 sounds more
Eight.
right.
Eight.
Yeah, and it's a sequel. You think that it's an adaptation because there's been a comic book, there's been a movie, there's been a video game. All of these things shared that same story. Brian Lee O'Malley had said that he deliberately wrote one Scott Pilgrim story and he didn't want to write more because he was like, first of all, how do you continue this? But also just, I don't want to be 40 still writing Scott Pilgrim,
Yeah.
and now I guess he is 40 or however old he is still writing Scott Pilgrim, but there was a gap there. It's not like
Yeah.
he's been doing that
Yeah.
this whole time.
Yeah.
um so yeah, uh the show, it that first episode follows the first story pretty faithfully. It downplays Knives Chow and Scott Pilgrim's relationship because I think in 2023 we're less willing to forgive a 23-year-old dating a high schooler. So whereas the movie actually starts, I think, with the line, once upon a time in Toronto, Canada, Scott Pilgrim was dating a high schooler. That's like the first thing, and he's like super proud of it. In this, he's like, we're not really dating, we're just sort of friends. We held hands once. That was really it.
Yeah.
Um, but it follows the same basic story until you get to that first boss fight with Matthew Patel. And we're expecting Scott to like knock him on his tush, and instead Matthew Patel wins. And that's weird. Like Scott Pilgrim, the main character of the series, essentially dies in the first episode. Like they have a funeral for him in the second episode and everything. Um, so at that moment, like I remember I'm sitting on my couch watching this thing, and I'm going through my phone because I know this story, and then all of a sudden Scott Pilgrim loses, and my mind was just blown. I was like, what? What just happened here? So that's your background.
Yep.
Yeah.
And yes. So I was going to ask, what does it mean for him to take off in the
Yeah.
title? Because
Right.
Scott Pilgrim versus the World, or is that the title of the movie, versus
The
the World?
movie is versus the world. Scott
That's what
Pilgrim
I
versus
thought.
the World was the title of one of the books of the Scott Pilgrims, but most people think of it as Precious Little. It was like Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life was the first volume. They called the box set Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little box set. It speaks to the entitlement of the character. It's like his precious little life. Like even the
Yes.
author is trying to tell you this guy kind of sucks. Don't look at
Yeah.
him as like this awesome hero. But
Right.
yeah,
And then versus the World just takes that and runs with it, because he suddenly is his life is not so precious anymore, and everyone is against him, and oh my gosh, why?
yeah,
And now in this third installment, Scott Pilgrim takes off. It's very interesting to think about the ways in which one can take off.
right,
Like Scott Pilgrim, the character kind of took off after that movie. It
yeah.
became a life of its own. Scott Pilgrim takes off in that he dies at the end of the first episode, and you kind of can't believe that he did. He just took off. What? I think what do you think the significance is of the title?
And then the third way to interpret it, which I think you ultimately come to see, is that he literally just took off. Like he is the one. So Ramona spends most of the show trying to investigate what happened to Scott. Not
Right.
necessarily because she's really in love with him, because they really just
No.
met. It's like some people are blaming her for his death. So she wants to get to the bottom of it. And what she comes to the understanding of, because somebody has some kind of amazing footage of like the Battle of the Bands thing in that crummy little club where she's able to zoom in, pause, and see there's some kind of portal that Scott gets pulled into. So he doesn't actually die at the end of that first episode like
Right.
we were led to believe. We later find out old Scott Pilgrim pulled him down into the future and he took off. He left.
Yep.
Um, so yeah,
So let's talk a little bit about that, because okay, so let's just say all spoilers are
yeah,
on the table, right?
yeah,
Obviously.
yeah,
So future Scott Pilgrim comes into present Scott Pilgrim's life and snatches him and pulls him into the future.
yeah.
For what exactly?
So,
Because the go ahead, sorry.
oh okay. No, no, I thought you were gonna. That was. Oh, go ahead. Oh, that was a legit
Well,
question.
yes, like
Yeah.
let's talk about it. Let's talk
Sure.
about it, because not much has changed in the future. There are still people glomming on other people and glomming
Yeah,
off other people.
yeah.
Ramona is there, and Scott Pilgrim from the future has a very specific reason for snatching Scott Pilgrim from the present.
So in the future, Ramona at some point leaves Scott. And Scott is so broken up about it that he wants to prevent himself from ever marrying her so he doesn't have to go through that pain.
Right.
The Scott Pilgrim book was really deep in that whole like owning up to your mistakes and trying to atone for things. It got a little washed down in the movie, and I think it's probably even more washed down here. But it does come into play where like both Scott and Ramona kind of have to own up to like, all right, these are the mistakes we made, and we have to kind of like go forward with them. Um, it's interesting because Scott older Scott is the one that pulls him down, and even older Scott winds up being the true big bad of the series. It like you said before we hit record, this is bananas. Like there's
Yeah. So I think it's interesting that the first episode makes you think that it's just a retelling of the movie
yeah,
until you get to the end of the first episode and you're like, what the hell just happened? And then you press play on the second episode and you realize this isn't just the animated version of the movie because
right.
that's what they make you think.
Yeah.
This is, and it's kind of not also, it's not a sequel, it's an alternate version of events.
Until you realize it is a sequel. Like that's what's crazy. Like you go through all these phases. Like that's why I had to watch it immediately again after I watched it the first time. Because the first time I'm just like tearing what little hair I have left out of my head, like going like, what am I watching? What is this? You know, and then finally at the end when you're like, okay, it's a sequel, there's time travel involved. Like he's
Yeah,
going back after the events of the first movie. Then I was finally able to be like, all right, let me rewatch this and like, probably be able to
yeah,
appreciate it for what it is. But there
yeah.
is a deep kind of there is kind of a deep plot line here. You know, I don't know how well it's executed per se, but there is like a whole deep story of like, Ramona has to learn like to stop running away from the things that she loves and everything. And
Mhm.
it's really just painted with this whole brush of like fighting and like craziness, like just general banana insanity. I don't. It's but it was worth it. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I don't
It
know
was
that it's the
fun.
sort of thing. Yeah, it's a ton of fun. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know that I would necessarily want them to make another sequel or another
I,
season. It does
I
kind
don't
of
know how they
end in like a
could.
faux end of Back to the Future sort of way where they're like, yeah, to be continued, even though they don't intend to make another one. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I one of the things that has stuck with me for the entire time, every time I think about this show, I think about these sequence of scenes. Ramona changes her hair color every single episode.
yeah.
And I'm while I was watching it, I was trying to read into the colors that she chose, like
Oh,
darker colors for feeling dark and brighter colors for feeling happy.
I
And
never even
I
considered that.
I'm probably overthinking it,
Maybe
but
not. Maybe not.
the fact that they took the time to include her, I mean, it was like in a 30-minute show, 10 seconds of non-speaking just action, and slow action is a lot of real estate, right?
Yeah.
And they took at least 10 to 15 seconds per episode for us to watch her at the sink bleaching her hair, taking a shower, washing it out, putting the color back in, taking a shower, washing it out. And I thought, this is what are they trying to say with this? This is really interesting.
Well, I think it's part of the fact that it's Ramona's show. It's not Scott's show. Like it's called Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, but Ramona is the main character.
Yes.
And that's why when I talk about like the deep learning that comes at the end, it's not really Scott that needs to learn some kind of great lesson. Like, yes, he was told he had to fight for Ramona better than he did. But truthfully, I don't really think that was totally on him. Like, Ramona says that she left him and it really tore Scott up. But like, if you leave, you shouldn't expect the other person to come after you. She was like, we could have been together that whole time. You just needed to come after me. I needed some space. And I'm like, well, you divorced the guy. Like
Right.
that's not something you
Yeah.
do like, willy-nilly, like in a weekend,
No.
Um, so she needs to learn that she needs to stop running from the things that she loves. And she's the one that spends the whole show investigating. So, yeah,
Yeah. It's interesting that she's not really invested in him, but
right.
she investigates his disappearance in such a thorough way that she does indeed get to the bottom of it and she does figure out what happened. You're right, it is. She's the main character. I didn't think about that, but you're 100% right.
And I think it's interesting, like, because it's so hard to explain, because Scott isn't there, the whole cast of characters revolves around her in a different way than it did before. So like before, they were just boss fight enemies. But now all of the evil X's aren't really bad guys anymore. Like
Right.
they don't have Scott to fight. They're all suspects in this great mystery. But when we find out that like none of them really care about Scott at all, like they show up at Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Musical or whatever they call it at the end, and they're like, "It must be you who's trying to stop Scott," and they're like, "Scott, who? Whatever, I don't care."
What?
like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
none of them care. They're all just like
No.
figures from her
They
life that are back.
they have their own subplot. Like
Yeah.
they so don't care about Scott so much that they have their own B plot that is happening in conjunction with everything else, congruently, or what is the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it. You know
I'll
what I
take
mean?
that one. Which I think is cute because it gave us, I don't want to say like an epilogue, but like a sort of like a better ending for every character in that
Mm-hmm.
movie, because everybody really winds up okay in the end, like
Yeah.
they all get their happy ending in a way. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
not Scott, but Scott is sent back to the future with the knowledge that like, if he Ramona's gonna try, if he just like works a little harder, maybe they can get back together. And present Scott is with her anyway. So like all of the exes, I mean, maybe not Todd, like well no, I think even Todd in the end is shown like getting back on the vegan diet. Um
Yeah.
yeah.
So, did you think okay, I have a very strange question for you. So, Scott Pilgrim and Todd Ingram have very, very similarly sounding names. Like if I were again somebody who was going to read into this, I would wonder if like they were like the yin and yang of each other.
Hmm.
Any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I mean, it's hmm. That's worth thinking about. I mean, I guess I'm thinking about comic books, not comic book Scott, comic book Todd, who in
Yeah.
the book is very different from the movie. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you were going to create a character in such a way, it would have to be the way that it was originally created. Because if you're talking about naming the character for the sake, then I wouldn't say look at the adaptation. I'd say look at the original thing. So
Yeah.
in the comic book, Todd, like in the movie, Todd's kind of an idiot. Like, he loses his vegan powers not because he's like cheating on his diet, but because he honestly doesn't know that there's like milk and eggs in gelato. In the comic book, he not only knows, he's like deliberately cheating on his diet, like eating chicken parm, and he's like, oh, the
Right.
vegan police are never gonna find me. And he's cheating on Envy with the her drummer or whatever. Like he's just like a crap character, but so is Scott in a lot of ways. So I don't know. I don't know. I'd have to sit with that for a little while.
Yeah. I just thought it was interesting as I was perusing the cast list.
Yeah.
Pilgrim and Ingram, like why would you as a writer create two such similarly sounding
I think it's because they had to
names?
create like 40 different names. Like there's seven evil
You think
X's and
so?
yeah, like there's
Okay.
a sister, there's a roommate, there's so many characters in this, you
There
know.
is. It's hard to keep track of them. No, you're
I
right.
mean, it's just
You're
hard.
right.
You have to come up with like 40 names. Eventually, some of them are probably going to sound alike.
Okay. I'm reading
Yeah.
too much into it then.
I don't know. I mean, maybe if I think about it for a while, I don't know. But one of the things that I really love about Scott Pilgrim, and it continued into this show, was the cross section of comic books and video game culture. Um, so the and now movies. So this is a TV show that is a sequel to a film that has the film cast in the style of the comic book, featuring a score composed and sounding similar to the score for the video game. Like you have such this melding of all the different ways that this has been done in the past, and I loved the way it came together. One of the things that I would ask you, as somebody who would not be likely to pick up on a lot of the video game references, let's say,
Yeah.
especially we'll talk especially about the movie because you probably remember that more than the show. Did that affect your enjoyment or not enjoyment of the movie and the show, or did was it just sort of like white noise?
No, at first I was like, what in the hell is going on? Because I was not expecting fights at all. I thought
Yeah.
this was going to be like quirky rom-com. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Like any other quirky rom-com.
Which is how they
Um,
promoted it, to be honest.
yes, I
Yeah.
know, which is why I was so confused. And I would not have gotten the musical with fights in place of songs at all until
I
you just said that.
I wouldn't have thought of it either, except that they had no idea how to promote this movie. So they said that in the commercials. Like they were like, listen, this is kind of like a musical, but every time there's this, they fight. Like that was the best way they knew how to like say. And I mean, today you would just put out a poster that says like Chris Evans, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Brandon Routh,
Yeah, you would need
Al
to explain it.
Brie Larson, who we haven't talked about at all. But
Oh
yeah,
my
like,
God, I know. I couldn't
yeah,
believe when she popped up. I was like,
yeah,
that's Brie Larson? What?
yeah.
Uh,
So we'll
yeah.
get back to what we were just talking, but just to go down the Brie Larson rabbit hole for a second,
Yes,
what I
let's.
really loved about Brie Larson in the original film, she sings a song called Black Sheep by a band called Metric, and in this, her character sings "I Will Remember You," and instead of her singing it, it's Metric. Now, on the original soundtrack, we it took 10 years to get Brie Larson's version of Black Sheep. They just put the Metric version on the soundtrack. So I thought it was interesting. Like they never let Brie Larson sing for herself on the soundtracks. It's always a Metric, yeah.
Damn.
But
That's too
I
bad.
I honestly loved that rendition of "I Will Remember You," and it's so self-centered of Envy Adams to come into a, like every character in this kind of sucks in their own way.
Well, I think that's what's so real about it. Like every person on earth is flawed,
Yeah,
right? Like there is no such thing as a perfect person. There's just varying degrees of flaw. And Ramona is maybe the least flawed, but
probably, yeah.
she's still got a huge blind spot when it comes to Scott. Um, I think that's just how people are. That's how friends are. You know what I mean? Like I'm trying to remember the name of the roommate.
Wallace Wells.
Thank you. In the
Kieran
future,
Culkin.
yes. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, so underrated. I
I know,
couldn't
another
believe
big
it.
star that yeah.
I couldn't believe it. So in the future, you know, present Scott is in future Scott's house, and Wallace comes out in his bathrobe, looking for food or something. And I was like, they're still living together even after
Yeah.
Scott and Ramona are married, but like that's just who Wallace is?
Well, not so much who Wallace is, but how much of a moocher Scott is. Because in the
Yes.
TV show, there's a deliberate line like, I let you crash here and you never left.
Yes.
Like,
That's right.
yeah.
That's exactly right. I couldn't remember who was mooching off of who.
Oh, no.
But even
Anytime there's a question of who is the shittier character, it's
it's
always
Scott.
Scott.
No,
Yeah.
you're right. I forgot. I forgot. So he and Ramona live as a married couple in Wallace's house.
Do they? I thought it was that he
I
was living
think.
there after Ramona kicked him out.
Okay, maybe because I was
Maybe.
like, wow.
That wouldn't surprise me either, but I feel like Ramona would have it together a little bit more.
Ramona would not stand for that, I don't think.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of Ramona and employment, or like what Ramona does for, not mooching off of other people, it was a little interesting. In the original comic book and movie, Ramona is a delivery person for Amazon Canada. In this, they
Yeah.
made her a Netflix delivery person because God forbid Netflix like throw even just a second of promotion Amazon's way. You know?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
That was actually pretty funny.
Mm. But okay, so
Uh,
we went down a rabbit
mm,
hole before that. I don't
yeah.
even remember where we were before that. We went from Scott mooching back to Brie Larson, back to I don't know.
God, where were we? I don't
Oh,
know.
the video game stuff. Like
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, I would never have when I first sat down to watch this movie at your suggestion. I did not know what I was getting myself into. And the very when they started mentioning the seven evil X's, I was like, "What?"
Mm.
And then when the first fight came, I was like, "What?" And at that point, I was like, "Okay, the wheels are off. I just need to let this happen to me. I'm just going to absorb this."
In my defense, the reason that I recommended this to Kate is that she's a big fan of Edgar Wright, the director of
Yeah.
the film.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, here's this Edgar Wright thing you haven't seen, and it
So
happens to be something I love. I pulled out all my stuff. Here, we got a book, we got a movie, we got a video game, we got an awesome soundtrack. Okay,
that's amazing.
this is
So
something
let's
that
talk
has
about,
spanned so much.
let's actually tell the people what else Edgar Wright has done, because
Sure.
without knowing, it might be a little bit like, who's Edgar Wright?
So he
What?
did that trilogy. It was like Hot Fuzz, Shaun of the Dead, The World at the World's End or The
World's
World's End.
End. Yep.
And
Baby
Last
Driver,
Night at
he did.
Soho was pretty recent. Uh,
Yep.
yeah.
Baby Driver, he did, which was really good.
I didn't
Oh,
even
I
know
didn't
that
know
was
there was
him
a Baby
actually.
Driver. Yeah, I didn't either until I just Googled it. The
Hmm.
Running Man. Like, he is a very, very prolific and really talented. Shaun of the Dead might be my favorite Halloween movie of all time. It might be top 10 movies of all time for me.
It's
Like,
a
it
very
is
good
just,
film. I will
it's a
definitely say.
perfectly constructed movie. It's actually the 30-year anniversary of Shaun of the Dead this
Oh
year.
wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It,
Anyway, yeah, go
I
ahead.
was gonna say it's Kate refuses to watch anything super scary. I've been trying to get her to
Yeah.
watch Silence of the Lambs so that we can have an episode of the show on Clarice, the CBS TV show. But
Yeah.
I'm like, you saw Shaun of the Dead, you saw Fargo. Silence of the Lambs is not as scary as those things.
Really? Okay, so here's the problem though. Shaun of the Dead and Fargo are in what I would call the camp of fiction.
Like a surreal kind of, yeah, like,
Silence of the Lambs could happen to me. Like, women are kidnapped and thrown into
yeah.
like, what is the Kimmy Schmidt show? The
The
Reverend,
Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. The
what was the
Reverend
name of
Gary Wayne, something, was it Reverend Wayne, Gary Wayne? I can't remember the name, but it was something like that.
Yes. Yes.
Durnsville's worst wedding DJ.
I love that so much.
Uh,
Yeah. So I don't know. Anything that feels too real is really, really hard for me to watch. That's all. But I'm
it's
gonna do
just
it.
it's so good.
I'm gonna do it for Vinny. I'm gonna
if
get
you
myself a
want,
little.
if you want, um, we could do it together. Like, we could like
Mm.
text as we're because I'll absolutely.
Yes.
They just came out with a new
Yes.
edition of the Silence Lamps. That's why I was thinking about it. And it is such a gorgeous edition. I would have no problem rewatching that. So if you want to like
Okay.
text and kind of like mock it a
You're
little bit so
on.
it's not as scary, I'll definitely do that with you. And then you won't need me during
100%.
Clarice because that's just crime
Okay.
scene investigation. But yeah. Okay,
I love
cool.
it.
Back to
Let's do
Scott
it.
Pilgrim though. Yes.
Yay. Yeah,
um
sorry. Scott Pilgrim.
maybe
Great.
some
Two thumbs up.
yeah, maybe some
Recommended.
final thoughts. So you would definitely recommend Scott Pilgrim Takes Off?
100%.
I
Yeah,
mean,
Both of them. I would
yeah.
recommend the
You
movie and
absolutely
the.
have to watch the movie before you watch the show. It's not going to make any sense at all if you
It's
don't.
just fun. It's just really, really silly fun, but smart. It's not okay. So, at the risk of offending many people, it's not Beavis and Butthead fun. It's like intelligent, silly fun. Does
That
that
is such a weird thing to compare this to. Like
right? Well, because they're both cartoons, and some people really love Beavis and Butthead, and they would call it just
that's
fun.
that's that wow.
Would you
That's like
compare it to like
saying like,
what would you compare it to? Like
that's like
South
saying
Park?
like To Kill a Mockingbird and, like Drew Carey's Dirty Jokes and Beer are both technically books. Like,
Sorry. Okay, yeah, you're right. You're right.
um,
What would
well, first of all, this is a random rabbit hole side thing to go down. There are two Beavis and Butthead things that I think are brilliantly funny entertainment.
I
The
knew you would say
movie
this. Yeah.
Beavis and Butthead to America. If you haven't seen the movie, absolutely check it out. It follows the hero's journey, and it is a very intelligent film that these two idiot characters just happen to get dropped into.
Okay.
Um, like they think they're on this great quest to have sex with Demi Moore's character, when really they wind up in this like government plot thing to like it's you just have to see it.
Okay.
It came out around the same time as the South Park movie, and I remember like linking the two of those in my mind. Like these are both extremely intelligent films that just happen to have dumb characters like dropped into the middle of them.
Okay.
Um, and I mean, Mike Judge, who wrote that, went on to do like
Oh, I
Office
love him.
Space and, you know, like
Yes.
Idiocracy. So, like, if I tell you that Beavis and Butthead is written just as intelligently as Office Space and Idiocracy, but that same, like, you know, crude kind of, you know, funny humor, you'll know what you're getting yourself into.
Okay.
Then
Fair.
there was one episode of the show. It was intended, I think it was intended to be the series finale. Beavis and Butthead are dead. And basically what happens is like the two of them are just sitting on their couch and they decide they don't want to go to school. So like somebody calls their house, you know, from the school to be like, "Hey, they're absent." And Butthead, I think he answers the phone and he's like, "Oh yeah, those guys are dead." And so like the whole school goes into this like, "Oh my God, they're dead," you know? And it just escalates. Like, you know, the staff are throwing a
Oh,
party and like
yeah.
it's on the news where like these students died. And they're like, "Dude, we took a day off from school and there's dead bodies at school." Like that's so they, you know, everybody's celebrating or whatever, and then they show up and it ruins everybody's fun. But because they
Oh my
need to
God,
see the
that's
dead bodies,
amazing.
not realizing it's them. The other intelligent thing that I would say came out of Beavis and Butthead was its spinoff, Daria. If you
Oh,
were
I
like,
forgot about Daria.
yeah, Daria was one of their classmates that was always ripping on the two of them in that show. And then
Yeah.
it spun off into like maybe the most 90s cartoon, like early 90s cartoon I could possibly think of. Like if you want to think about like the Nirvana sort of grunge culture, like,
Yeah.
you know, I don't care. Daria was
Yeah.
that, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Didn't God, the cartoon or the animated show about the psychiatrist played by John Lovitz, Dr.
the,
Wasn't
it
that
was, I know what
also
you're
part
talking about. It
of
was like,
that was also on MTV at about the
I know
same time.
exactly
Like,
what you're talking about. I don't remember what it's called. Yeah.
God. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's just part of the same
Yeah.
genre. Anyway. All
It's gonna
right.
kill
What
me to think about that.
I'm gonna
So
Google it really
anyway,
fast
I
while
would
you do your
absolutely, like I
last
said,
thoughts.
I would absolutely recommend Scott Pilgrim. Two thumbs up. Definitely check out the movie first. You know what we skipped in the beginning of the show is
What?
what are you currently binging? I don't
We
know.
did.
I don't know if you want to
We,
do that now or if you want to just save it for
yeah.
the next show.
So the John Lovitz show is Dr. Katz.
That yeah.
Um, and the thing that I just binged was Presumed Innocent on Apple TV. And this is a remake of the movie that was, I don't know, back in the 90s. And it was very, very good. I I did not call the ending, but I would never rewatch it. I love
Hmm.
Ruth Negga, but I don't love Jake Gyllenhaal. I think he's kind of a vanilla actor. I don't love him. And I thought
Have
it
you
was
ever seen
fine. He was
Donnie
great.
Darko? No, it's creepy. You
No,
didn't watch it.
of course not. Why would I watch that? No.
Jake Gyllenhaal was awesome in Donnie Darko. That's like the movie of his career, and that's another one that's got like a huge cast. Like Drew Barrymore's in that.
Really?
What's his name or what's her name? Maggie Gyllenhaal, his sister, is in that with him. She plays his sister in the movie. Which is probably the only time
Mm.
they ever got to do that. Um, Great movie, but not for you.
No.
Yeah,
No, I
no,
wouldn't think so.
especially
No.
not at
Anyway.
night. I remember there's a supernatural kind of rabbit that looks very scary in that movie. And if you watch it with surround sound, generally speaking, when you watch anything with surround sound, the talking comes out of the center channel, and you just expect that. When the
Hmm.
bunny talks, it comes out of every channel, and it just sounds so creepy. Like he's all around you.
That's a
Ah,
no.
yeah. But very good movie, just not for her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Presumed Innocent was mine. What are you currently binging?
I just finished Tron Uprising. I've been on kind of a Tron kick because Tron Ares, they just announced or dropped there isn't a trailer yet, but like at their big Disney Expo, they put out like kind of a trailer for it. So I wanted to kind of get back in the spirit of Tron. I watched the original 80s movie and I rewatched Tron Legacy, and then the show, which I had never watched up until now, bridges the two of them, or at least tries in a way. And I'm not going to say I was unhappy with the show, but it was pretty disappointing. 19 episodes or so, and I don't believe they knew they were ending. Like it was one of those things where you get canceled.
Ooh.
So like there was an opportunity in the last episode. Um, I don't really, I don't really want to spoil it, but at the same time, it's been more than the 3 years that we say we're not gonna spoil things for, and I'm not really recommending that you watch it either. But I've given you enough time here with me rambling to stop the audio if you don't want this spoiled for you. There
No.
was,
So, sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, in Tron Legacy, Tron himself is a bad guy. Like he got brainwashed, whatever you want to call it, when you reprogram a program into being like one of the followers of the lead, the big bad. So the show kind of tries to walk, maybe like the end of the show would have been that happening. See how we got there, kind of a thing. And there was an opportunity for that in like one of the last episodes. Like he's being brainwashed into that and he gets rescued and then the show just ends and I'm like, oh well, you had an
Oh,
opportunity
okay.
there and I realized you didn't know you were going to end, or at least that's what I think. But it just kind of like, it was one of those things where you binge a show and then it doesn't go anywhere and you feel kind of like, well, why did I wind up doing this whole thing, you know?
Oh, that sucks. But you just reminded me that it's been so long since we've talked. I did binge something else that I think you would love. And every time I watched it, I meant to text you and I just forgot. There was a very small show that only lasted one season called Ghosted. Adam Scott and Craig Robinson are the co-leads, which is not a combination that I would have ever put together. And it is about a subsection
Wait,
of the
isn't Adam Scott
FBI.
the one from Severance?
Yes.
So he was from Parks and Rec. The other one was from The
The
Office. That
Office.
seems like a very natural pairing to me. I don't
I
know.
know, but I've never seen them interact together on screen, so I would
Sure.
not have naturally put them together.
Yeah.
They work for a subsection of the FBI that investigates supernatural things. And every week there's a new like monster of the week. Like one day they're chasing ghosts, another it's an alien, and like the cast of characters is so funny. But they release the episodes out of order for some reason. So the very last episode doesn't match what happened in the episode that came out before it.
Is this on purpose?
And I don't know. I
Ah.
don't know.
Hmm.
Anyway, I think you would love it. It's on Netflix, or no, it's on Hulu. Super funny, very silly, very fun, but very smart, and a lot of really fun guest stars. One season. It's like 10
Well,
episodes, 18, maybe 18 episodes, something like
I'll
that.
try to get into it. My big issue right now, and this is just something I got to suck up and do, is like Hulu signed me out on my TV, and
Oh
I don't remember
no.
the password. So I mean, like on a website, you would just be like, all right, forgot password, get the email, plug it in. But on the TV, it's such a pain. Like I don't know. I got to take like 15 minutes and figure it out.
It's worth it.
Yeah.
It's worth it. You should definitely do that.
All right.
All
So
right.
what are we binging next? What's the next episode of the show that people should bone up for?
So, Preacher is what I am advocating
Sure.
for.
Speaking of
That
Ruth
came
Nega,
out.
right? Because that was your big what am I currently
Yes.
binging? Yeah.
Yeah, I love her so much and she was
Yeah.
amazing in Preacher. Um yeah, I am all about rewatching Preacher. So I think we'll probably just do like season 1
Yeah.
in the next episode.
Yeah, that'll give me enough time A to watch it and B to figure out how I'm gonna watch it because AMC kind of hoards their content a little bit. And it might be on Netflix because they tend to share their stuff on Netflix like really
God.
late, right?
Honestly, you should just buy it
Okay.
because it's that good.
I
I'm
mean,
trying
it's
to
within the
see.
wheelhouse. I mean, first of all, I have seen the first 2 seasons of Preacher. I didn't realize it went beyond that. But
Yeah.
it is in the wheelhouse of stuff that I always buy anyway. It's like an adaptation of a, I want to say DC or Vertigo comic.
It's 4 seasons and I believe it is Vertigo.
Yeah,
Yeah. And it looks like you can watch it on something called Sling.
I'm not gonna do that. Well, I actually do think I
Yeah.
have Sling installed. So
But I'm just gonna buy it because it's worth it. It's
sure.
that good.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
Cool.
until
All
next
right.
time.